Chapter 28 of Finn the Wolfhound by Alec John Dawson. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 28, Domestic Life in the Mountain Den. If a man succeeded in getting himself as much chopped about as Finn had been since the evening of his departure from the boundary rider's gunyah and the severance of his connection with the world of menfolk, he would require weeks of careful nursing and doctoring before he could be said to have recovered. Fortunately for the people of the wild, who have neither nurses nor doctors, and whose ways of life do not permit of prolonged periods of rest, recovery from wounds is not so serious a business with them as it is with us. When the Wolfhound and his admiring mate between them had thoroughly licked and cleansed his numerous wounds, he stretched himself deliberately across the rear corner of the den, and there lay, sleeping soundly, until the next morning was well advanced. His body was lacerated by the wounds of 3 considerable fights: the fight with Black Tip and his friend, the sufficiently violent struggle with the mother kangaroo, and lastly the most serious fight of the Wolfhound's life, which had ended in the death of Lupus. But even the 10 hours which Finn gave to sleep (he opened his eyes 2 or 3 times during that period, but did not move) brought a wonderful change in the aspect of these numerous wounds. They had advanced some distance in the direction of healing already. Now they were submitted to another thorough licking. Then Finn crept out into the sunlight beside the cave's mouth, and slept again, fitfully, till evening came. Then he sat up and licked all his wounds over again with painstaking and scrupulous care. They were healing nicely, and the healing process made Finn as stiff and sore as though he had had rheumatics in every joint in his body. So he crept painfully into the den again, and lay down to sleep once more, while Warrigal, with a friendly, wifely look at her lord, went out hunting. In this way 3 full days and nights passed, and on the 4th night Finn killed for himself, a small kill and not far from home, but a kill none the less, that required a certain agility of which he already found himself quite capable. In the matter of strength and of vital energy, the Wolfhound had immense reserves to draw upon, greater reserves really than any of the wild folk possessed, for in his youth he had never known scarcity of food, or lack of warmth, or undue exposure; and on the contrary, his system had been deliberately built up and fortified by the best sort of diet that the skill and science of man could devise. Finn could not have stood as much killing as a dingo and still have lived, for the dingo is as hard an animal to kill as any that walks upon 4 legs. But as against that, the Wolfhound could have stood a far greater living strain than any dingo. He had more to feed upon in himself. For actual toughness under murderous assault, a dingo could have beaten Finn, yet in a test of staying power, an ordeal of long endurance, the Wolfhound would have won easily, by reason of his greater reserve of strength and vitality. From this point onward, Finn's wounds troubled him but very little, and in the healing air of that countryside they soon ceased to be apparent to the eye. An ordinary dingo would assuredly have been obliged to fight many fights before obtaining ascendancy over the Mount Desolation pack, but the mastery fell naturally to Finn without calling for any effort upon his part. He had slain the redoubtable old leader and tyrant of the pack. He had soundly trounced one of the strongest among the fully grown young dingoes, Black Tip, and killed another in single-handed fight against 2. Now he administered condign punishment to 2 or 3 young bucks who ventured to attempt familiarity with Warrigal, but for fighting he was not called upon. Most of the pack had taken good measure of his prowess on the night of the slaying of Lupus, and that was enough for them, so far as mastery went. Further, the pack found Finn a generous leader, a kingly sort of friend, slow to anger and merciful even in wrath, open as the day, and never, in any circumstances, tyrannical or aggressive. Then, in the matter of his kills, Finn was generosity itself. As a hunter of big game he was more formidable than any 3 dingoes, and withal never rapacious. 3 portions he would take from his kill: 1 to satisfy his own hunger, 1 for Warrigal to satisfy her hunger upon, and a 3rd to be set aside and taken back to the den against the time when Warrigal would care to dispose of it. For the rest, be his kill what it might, Finn made the pack free of it. But no sort of temptation seemed strong enough to take the Wolfhound near to the haunts of men. It came to be understood that Finn would not touch sheep, and reasoning it out amongst themselves, the rest of the pack accepted this as a prohibition meant to apply to all of them. So that Finn's mastership was an exceedingly good thing for the squatters and their flocks all through the Tynagh. But a full-grown kangaroo, no matter how heavy and strong in the leg, never seemed too much for Finn, and so, all dingoes liking big game better than small, it came about that every night saw the Mount Desolation dingoes hunting in pack formation at the heels of the great Wolfhound. They scorned the lesser creatures whose flesh had fed them hitherto, and expected to taste wallaby or kangaroo flesh every night. Finn thoroughly enjoyed the hunting, and did not care how many fed at his kill, so that his mate and he had ample. Once the 2 youngest members of the pack, puppies quite new to the trail, were attacked and driven from the remains of a big kill the leader had made by an outlier, a strange dingo from some other range. The youngsters, bleeding and yelping, carried their woes to the scrub below the mountain, and within the hour Finn learned of it. Followed by Black Tip and 1 or 2 others of the more adventurous sort, he set out upon the trail of the outlier, now full fed, ran it down at the end of 4 or 5 miles hard galloping, pinned the unfortunate creature to the earth, and shook it into the long sleep, almost before they had come to a standstill together. This was true leadership, the pack felt, a thing Lupus would never have done. Something to be placed to the great Wolfhound's credit, and not forgotten. The mother of the whelps that were attacked, a big, light-coloured dingo with sharp prick ears, was particularly grateful to Finn. During this time a subtle change crept over Finn's appearance. In its details the change was so slight that the casual observer would have said it did not exist at all. Yet in truth it was radical. It would be impossible to put this change precisely into words. An Irish Wolfhound is never sleek, at least that is never a characteristic of the breed. Yet, as compared with the wild folk, every sort of animal which lives with men has a certain kind of sleekness or softness about it. It may be imagined that Finn did not have much of this when he escaped from the Southern Cross circus. And in the period which followed that escape, although he had in a sense associated with a man and a man's dog, yet there had not been much in the life of the boundary rider's camp to make for sleekness. Nevertheless, when Finn first met his mate, Warrigal, there had lingered about him still a kind of trimness, a suggestion of softness, far different indeed from that of the ordinary domesticated house-dog, but yet in its own way a sort of sleekness. Not a vestige of this remained now. Though he fed well and plentifully, and his life was not a hard one, since he only did that which pleased him, yet Finn had acquired now the hard, spare look of the creatures of the wild. In his alertness, in the blaze of his eyes, and the gleam of his fangs when hunting, in his extreme wariness, and in the silence of his movements, and his deadly swiftness in attack, Finn had become one of his mate's own kindred. He differed from them in his great bulk, his essentially commanding appearance, in his dignity, and in a certain lordly generosity which always characterized him. He never disputed. He never indulged in threats or recrimination. He gave warning when warning was needed. He punished when punishment was needed, and he killed if killing was desirable, making no sort of fuss about either process. Also, upon occasion, though not often, he barked. Otherwise he was thoroughly of the wild kindred, and the unquestioned master of the Mount Desolation range. Some 6 or 7 weeks after his arrival upon that range, Finn began to notice that Warrigal was changing in some way, and he did not like the change. It seemed to him that his mate no longer cared for him so much as she had cared. She spent more time in lying about in or near the den, and showed no eagerness to accompany him in his excursions, or to gambol with him, or even to lie with him on the warm flat ledge outside the den. She seemed to prefer her own company, and Finn thought her temper was getting unaccountably short, too. However, life was very full of independent interest for the Wolfhound, and it was only in odd moments that he noticed these things. One night he was thoroughly surprised when Warrigal snarled at him in a surly manner, without any apparent cause at all, unless because he had touched her with his nose in a friendly way, by way of inviting her to accompany him, he being bound for the killing trail in quest of that night's supper. Finn walked out of the den, carrying his nose as high as he could, in view of the stoop necessary at the entrance, and feeling rather put out. A dingo in his place would have snarled back at Warrigal, and, it may be, have wrangled about it for half an hour. Finn's dignity would not permit of this, but he was hurt, and decided that his spouse needed a lesson in courtesy. Since she responded so rudely to his invitation to join him in the hunt, she might go supperless for him. He would eat where he killed, and bring home nothing. Finn killed a half-grown kangaroo, a lusty red-coated youngster, that night, and he, with Black Tip and 2 or 3 others of the pack, fed full upon this before going down to the creek together to drink. Finn even spent an hour in trifling with a pair of sister dingoes, who generally hunted together, and ranged the trails with Black Tip in more or less sportive mood, till long after midnight. In the small hours the Wolfhound parted with Black Tip and the sportive sisters among the scrub at the mountain's foot, and wended his way alone to his den on the first spur, prepared, as many a male human has been in like case, to seek his rest without taking any notice of his mate, unless perchance he found her in a repentant mood. At the mouth of the cave he stooped low, as he was bound to do, to gain admittance, and in that moment he was brought to a halt by a long, angry, threatening snarl from within. Warrigal was very plainly telling her mate to remain outside, unless he was looking for trouble. This was unprecedented, and he was a very angry and outraged Wolfhound, who withdrew slowly, with as much dignity as might be in walking backward, with lowered head and shoulders. "You will think better of this before morning, my dear," was the sort of thought that Finn had in his mind, as he selected a comfortable sleeping place in the shadow of a bush some half-dozen paces away from the mouth of the den. And then, being well fed and rather tired, he fell into a sound sleep until just after daybreak, when he woke to the sound of an unfamiliar small cry. With head slightly on one side and ears cocked sharply, Finn listened. The small cry was repeated. It certainly was not Warrigal's voice, though it came from the inside of the den. Also there were a number of other small sounds that were strange, weak, quaint, gurgling sounds. Finn inclined his head a little farther to one side. Yes, his mate was licking something. Could she have been out and hunted alone? Even that would hardly account for the queer little weak, strange voices within the den. The dingo people are not cats, and when they kill outright. It was extremely puzzling and interesting, and Finn decided to investigate. After all, this was his own home, and, however rude she may have been, Warrigal was his own mate, for whom he had fought and bled in the past. The mate who had lovingly dressed his wounds and shared his kills for 9 weeks now, 9 long eventful weeks, which were more than equal to 9 months in human folks' lives. Finn stooped low in the entrance, and Warrigal snarled, but this time there was no note of aggression in her snarl. Indeed, to her mate there was a hint of appeal in the salutation, which said clearly, "Be careful, please be careful." he advanced with extreme caution into the den, and saw his spouse lying full at length on her side, her bushy tail curled round to form a background for the smallest of 4 sleek puppies of a yellowish-grey colour, whom she was nursing assiduously. Moving with the utmost delicacy and care, Finn sniffed all round his mate, refraining from touching the puppies by way of humouring Warrigal, in whose throat a low growl sounded whenever his nose approached the little strangers. Then Finn stood and stared at the domestic group with hanging head and parted jaws, his tongue lolling and his eyes saying plainly, "Well, well, well! Who'd have thought of this? They are really very nice little creatures in their insignificant way, though I don't quite see why their presence should make you snarl at your own lawful mate." Seeing that her lord manifestly entertained no shadow of a hostile intention toward the family, the history of the male dingo is not altogether free from blame in the matter of infanticide, Warrigal raised her nose in friendly fashion to the Wolfhound, and permitted him to lick her, which he did in the most affectionate manner, and with no further thought of her previous harshness. Then she gave a little whine and glanced round the walls of the den. Finn barked quietly, bidding his mate rest assured that all would be well, and 10 minutes later he was descending upon a rabbit earth that he knew of, a moving shadow of death among young bunnies assembled to welcome the dewy warmth of the new day. On the way home he dropped his rabbit to stalk a half-grown bandicoot, and finally, after less than an hour's absence, he returned to the den, carrying a rabbit and a bandicoot, so that Warrigal might have variety in her breakfast. Being parched with thirst, Warrigal greatly accepted both kills, and without actually eating either, drew some substance from both. Then, with an anxious look at the family, she nudged Finn out of the den with her nose, and, leaving him outside on the ledge, turned and raced for the creek like an arrow from a bow. She was back again inside of 2 minutes, with bright drops clinging to her fur. Finn had sat patiently beside the mouth of the den waiting, and for this Warrigal gave him a grateful glance of appreciation before gliding into her puppies, who already were beginning to whimper for warmth and nourishment. Finn took very naturally to the part of father and breadwinner. He lounged about the mouth of the den through the day, creeping in occasionally to see how things went with his mate, and returning then to keep guard outside. She allowed him now to touch the odd little creatures who were his children, but they did not like the feeling of his tongue, and wriggled away from it in their blind, helpless way. "There, there," said Finn, low down in his throat, and withdrew, marvelling afresh at the mysteries of life and the cleverness of femininity. As for Warrigal, she seemed absurdly happy and proud about it all now, and assumed considerable airs of importance. She took her food in brief snatches a dozen times during the day, and when Finn left her in the early night for the trails, she looked at him in a meaning way which said plainly that she attached importance to the matter of food supply, though she could not take to the trails herself, being otherwise and fully occupied. Finn licked her muzzle reassuringly and went out. The pack had to forage for itself that night, for when Finn made his kill, a fat rock wallaby, he announced in the most unmistakable manner that there was nothing to spare for followers that night, and marched off mountainwards, trailing the whole heavy kill over his right shoulder. In the course of the night it became known to all the wild people of that range that the mate of the leader of the pack had other mouths than her own to feed, and that for the time Finn would do all the hunting for the den on the first spur. Chapter 28